Okay, so we're diving into some interesting territory today, huh? Edging and gooning. You've probably heard the terms, maybe even whispered them with a little curiosity. Well, today, we're all about going beyond the buzzwords. We're going to unpack these practices, look at the potential benefits, and yeah, let's be real here, the potential downsides too. Knowledge is power, right? We're basing our deep dive on this article that popped up, talking about, get this, the health benefits of these practices. Now, before you think we've gone full-on medical journal on you, relax. This isn't some dry clinical breakdown. It's more about exploring the buzz in a way that's, informative but still approachable. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's define what we're even talking about here. What are edging and gooning? I'm really curious to hear your take on this.
Well, the way the article describes it, edging is kind of like a teasing game, but one that requires some serious self-control. It's about bringing yourself or your partner right to the edge of orgasm and then backing off, letting things cool down a bit and then building that arousal back up again. And this cycle, you can repeat it multiple times before, reaching the grand finale.
So it's like building suspense in a movie.
Right.
Right. Except you're the director, the audience, and maybe even the popcorn vendor all rolled into one.
That's a fantastic analogy, and it really highlights how edging isn't just about restraint, it's about creating those waves of sensation, really leaning into the anticipation. Now, gooning, that's a whole other level. We're talking about extending that heightened state of arousal potentially for hours.
Hours?
Yeah.
Wow, okay, now that's commitment. I have to say, the article was a bit vague on the whole gooning thing. They mentioned something about a trance-like state. Is that a real thing or just, hyperbole?
It's definitely an intriguing concept, and while everyone's experience of pleasure is different, there is a real physiological component at play here. That prolonged arousal in gooning could be linked to the sustained release of hormones like endorphins and dopamine, which are associated with those feelings of euphoria, relaxation. So while it might not be a trance in the, literal sense of the word, it's not surprising that some people report altered states of consciousness.
So if I'm understanding this right, edging is like building those peaks of anticipation, while gooning is more about like surfing that wave of sustained pleasure. Something that's fascinating. And speaking of fascinating, let's talk about what this article had to say about potential benefits. What really piqued your interest?
One of the things that stood out to me was this whole idea of enhanced sexual control, especially when we're talking about edging. And it's not just about making things last longer, although I'm sure for some people that's a definite plus. It's more about developing a deeper awareness of your own arousal patterns, recognizing those subtle cues that your body's sending you.
Yeah, so it's almost like you're becoming a connoisseur of your own pleasure, right?
Yeah.
Like really learning to savor all those nuances.
Yeah. Exactly. And that kind of self-awareness can be incredibly empowering, not just in the bedroom, but in other areas of life too. It kind of taps into this whole mindfulness trend that we're seeing everywhere these days. But this time, we're applying it to our sex lives.
Which totally makes sense, because with edging, you're kind of forced to be present in your body. You're paying attention to those sensations in a way that maybe we don't always do.
Okay.
But beyond the whole self-control aspect, the article also hinted at edging and gooning potentially boosting pleasure itself. Did that resonate with you at all?
It did, and I think it goes back to that mind-body connection we were just talking about. Think about it. When you're fully engaged in the moment, present with those sensations, the pleasure centers of your brain, they really light up. And by delaying gratification, you're essentially building up this reservoir of anticipation, which can make the eventual release that much more powerful.
That's like when you hold your breath underwater, right? That gasp of air, when you finally come up for air, it feels amazing because you're really craving it.
Exactly. And what's interesting? Some people find that this heightened awareness, this intentional approach to pleasure, it actually spills over into other areas of their lives too. They report feeling more connected to their bodies, more attuned to their senses in general, even more grateful for those everyday pleasures.
Wow. So it's not just about spicing things up in the bedroom then. It's about cultivating a deeper appreciation for sensation and pleasure in general. That's really fascinating. But let's talk about gooning for a bit. You mentioned the physiological side of things earlier with the whole hormone release. What else did you find intriguing about this more, I should say, ambitious practice? This has been super insightful, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the potential downsides too, right? I mean, the article did mention a few things that, we should probably address.
Of course, it's all about balance, isn't it? Every powerful experience comes with its own set of cautions.
Right, like you wouldn't go for a 10-mile run without stretching first.
Exactly. And in the same way you can strain a muscle by pushing yourself too hard physically, you can also experience something called overstimulation when it comes to sexual activity.
Overstimulation. Okay, now that sounds kind of intense. What does that even mean? How would someone even know if that's happening?
Well, think of it like this. It's basically your body's way of saying, hey, I need a timeout here. And everyone's different, but some of the signs might be, discomfort, maybe some sensitivity, even a bit of numbness in those sensitive areas.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's like the opposite of pleasure, a sign to ease off the gas a bit.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the mental and emotional side of things? The article touched on edging and gooning potentially becoming like addictive behaviors.
Right. And that's a really valid concern because any activity that triggers intense pleasure, it can have the potential to become, well, a little addictive, whether we're talking about food or social media, even exercise.
Oh, totally. It's easy to get hooked on a good thing.
Right. And it's not about demonizing pleasure at all. It's more about recognizing when something starts to, maybe negatively impact other areas of your life.
100%. So for anyone listening who's thinking, okay, wait a minute, am I taking this too far? What are some signs to watch out for?
Yeah.
And, what can they do about it?
I think it really boils down to honesty with yourself.
Yeah.
Asking yourself those tough questions like, how's this impacting my work, my relationships, my overall well-being? If the answer is, not so great, then it might be time to, maybe reassess things a little.
Yeah, take a step back, check in with yourself.
Exactly. And there's absolutely no shame in seeking out professional guidance if you feel like you need some extra support finding that balance. A therapist can provide a really safe and non-judgmental space to, explore those feelings and figure out what works best for you.
Such good advice. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious to hear your final thoughts. We've covered a lot of ground here, the potential benefits, the risks, the importance of balance, listening to your body. Where does this all leave us?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that everyone's relationship with pleasure is unique. What works for one person might not work for another. And while edging and gooning might enhance certain aspects of the sexual experience for some, they're definitely not a magic bullet for, a boring sex life.
Right. No quick fixes here.
Exactly. The most important thing is to approach your sexuality with curiosity, respect for yourself and your partners, and a healthy dose of, self-awareness.
Beautifully said. And on that note, for anyone listening who might be feeling a little more curious than when they started, I'll leave you with this thought. If gooning is all about sustaining that wave of pleasure, what does that say about how we usually approach pleasure in our, fast-paced, gotta-have-it-now world? Something to ponder, maybe even experiment with, in a safe and consensual way, of course. Until next time, keep those deep dive questions coming, and remember, knowledge is power.